There is a version of a baseball night that ends quietly. The game finishes. The players shower and leave. The coaching staff reviews the film. The front office checks the injury reports. Everyone goes home. The lights go off at the stadium. The city moves on to whatever comes next. This was not that kind of night. This was the kind of night where phones started ringing at hours when phones should not be ringing. Where the people who answer those calls, agents, reporters, front office personnel, looked at the name on the screen and felt something shift before they even picked up. Manager Dave Roberts made an announcement in the middle of the night. Not a press conference scheduled for the convenient morning slot. Not a statement released through the team's communications office in carefully chosen language. An announcement. Urgent, direct, carrying the specific weight of news that could not wait until daylight because the situation on the ground had already moved past the point where waiting was an option. 2 key Dodgers pitchers, hospitalized. In the same window of time that baseball was still processing that information, still trying to understand the scope of it, the timeline, what it meant for the rotation, what it meant for the season, the Dodgers front office was already moving. Within hours, a new contract was announced. 6 years. The best starting pitcher available on the market. A deal described immediately by those with knowledge of the figures as being on par with the Yoshinobu Yamamoto signing, one of the largest pitching contracts in the history of the sport. And then, as if the hospitalization and the historic contract were not enough for a single night, the general manager made emergency adjustments to the starting rotation. Not the next day. Not after a series of meetings and deliberations and careful consultation. 1 hour after the signing meeting concluded. The rotation was already being rewritten. This is the story of the night the Dodgers remade themselves under pressure. What happened? How they responded. And what it tells us about an organization that has spent years building the infrastructure to move faster than any crisis it faces. Before we talk about the contract or the rotation or the midnight announcement, we need to sit with what the hospitalizations actually meant in the moment they were confirmed. 2 key pitchers. Not peripheral roster pieces. Not depth options being developed for a future need. Key pitchers, the kind whose names appear in game planning conversations, whose roles in the rotation create a structure that everything else is organized around. When those players are hospitalized, the structure does not bend. It breaks. And the organization is left holding the pieces at a time of night when most of the tools for fixing things are not immediately available. The Dodgers pitching staff has been one of the most carefully constructed in baseball over the past several seasons. The investment, in terms of money, in terms of draft capital, in terms of the specific organizational philosophy around pitcher development and usage, is enormous. Every piece of that staff exists within a system that accounts for workload, health, sequencing, and long-term sustainability. Hospitalizations do not fit within that system. They arrive outside of it, without warning, without a transition period, without the gradual adjustment that normal roster management allows for. What the Dodgers faced in the hours after the news broke was not simply a personnel problem. It was a structural emergency. 2 holes in a rotation that had been functioning as a unit, holes that could not be filled from within because the depth options, however capable, were not designed for immediate deployment at this level of stakes. Roberts understood this immediately. Which is why the announcement came in the middle of the night instead of the morning. Because by morning, the decisions needed to already be made. When a manager makes a public announcement in the middle of the night, the content matters. But so does the timing. The timing of Roberts' announcement told a specific story, one that the words themselves only partially captured. It said that the organization had assessed the situation, reached its conclusions, and decided that the baseball world needed to know before the overnight news cycle had time to fill the vacuum with speculation. Because speculation, in the absence of official information, is its own kind of damage. It creates uncertainty in the minds of players who are trying to prepare. It creates noise that distracts from the actual work of fixing the problem. It creates a version of the story that the organization then has to spend energy correcting rather than energy solving. Roberts chose to control the narrative before the narrative controlled him. His announcement was measured, precise. It acknowledged the hospitalizations directly without providing medical details that were not yet confirmed or appropriate to share publicly. It acknowledged the impact on the rotation without catastrophizing or minimizing. And it signaled, without stating explicitly, that the organization was already in motion. That last signal was the most important one. In a crisis, the most reassuring thing a leader can communicate is not that everything is fine. Everything was clearly not fine. The most reassuring thing is that the people responsible for solving the problem are already solving it. Roberts communicated that. In the middle of the night, with the kind of calm that comes not from the absence of urgency but from the presence of a plan. Now let's talk about the signing. Because the signing is where the story shifts from crisis to something larger. The Yoshinobu Yamamoto contract, signed by the Dodgers ahead of the 2024 season, was one of the defining transactions in recent baseball history. 12 years. $325 million. The largest contract ever given to a pitcher. It was a statement about how the Dodgers view pitching, how they value long-term investment over short-term flexibility, and how willing they are to commit fully to a player they believe in. When the new contract is described as being on par with Yamamoto, that is not casual language. That is a specific comparison being made by people who understand exactly what the Yamamoto deal represented, and who are saying, with that comparison, that this new signing carries the same weight. 6 years. For the best starting pitcher available. In the middle of a night when 2 of their key pitchers were hospitalized. The timing is the story. Because signing a pitcher of this caliber, negotiating the contract, finalizing the terms, reaching the agreement, does not happen in a single night. The groundwork for this deal had been laid over weeks, possibly months. The Dodgers front office had been in conversation, had been building toward this moment, had been preparing for a signing of this scale with the methodical patience that defines how they approach every major acquisition. What the hospitalization did was not create the signing. It accelerated the announcement. It moved the timeline from, when the moment is right, to, tonight, because the moment just arrived before we expected it. That distinction matters enormously. Because it means the Dodgers were not panicking. They were executing a plan that already existed, executing it faster than they had originally intended, under pressure they had not anticipated, but executing it nonetheless. The difference between a panicked reaction and an accelerated plan can look identical from the outside. From the inside, the organization knows which one it is. This was an accelerated plan. Here is the detail that tells you everything about how the Dodgers organization operates. 1 hour after the signing meeting concluded, 1 hour after the new pitcher's contract was finalized and the handshakes were done and the paperwork was in process, the general manager was already adjusting the starting rotation. Not scheduling a meeting for the following morning to discuss rotation options. Not asking the coaching staff to come in early and work through the scenarios. 1 hour after the meeting. Emergency adjustments. The rotation was rewritten in real time. What that timeline reveals is an organization that had already done the scenario planning before the crisis arrived. Because rotation adjustments of this complexity, factoring in the new signings' readiness, the remaining healthy starters, the upcoming schedule, the opposing lineups in the next rotation turn, cannot be done accurately in 1 hour unless you already have the framework built. The GM had the framework. The hospitalizations filled in the variables. The signing provided the new piece. And within 1 hour, the system produced an answer. This is the infrastructure that separates organizations that survive crises from organizations that are defined by them. The Dodgers have spent years building decision-making systems that can operate under pressure at speed. Not because they anticipated this specific crisis, no one anticipated this specific crisis, but because they understood that crises arrive without warning and the only preparation that matters is preparation that exists before the warning. The rotation adjustment 1 hour after the meeting was not impressive because it was fast. It was impressive because it was right. Rushed decisions made under pressure in the middle of the night are usually compromised decisions, shaped by the urgency of the moment rather than the logic of the situation. This one was not compromised. It was clean. And the fact that it was clean, under those conditions, in that timeline, tells you what this front office is built from. Step back from the individual transactions, the hospitalizations, the contract, the rotation adjustment, and look at what this night means for the Dodgers season as a whole. Every contending team in baseball reaches a moment of genuine vulnerability. A moment where the carefully constructed plan encounters something it was not designed to handle. Where the depth chart gets tested beyond the scenarios that were modeled in the offseason. Where the distance between "we have contingencies" and "the contingencies are being used right now" disappears entirely. The Dodgers reached that moment this week. What separates teams that survive those moments from teams that are derailed by them is not talent, though talent matters. It is not resources, though resources help. It is organizational clarity. The ability to look at a situation that has moved outside the planned parameters and make decisions that reflect genuine conviction rather than the noise of the crisis. Robert's midnight announcement was organizational clarity. The 6-year contract was organizational clarity. The GM's rotation adjustment 1 hour after the meeting was organizational clarity. None of those decisions were easy. None of them were made in comfortable conditions with complete information and unlimited time. All of them were made the way the best decisions under pressure are always made, with the values and the frameworks and the pre-existing plans that an organization builds during the calm periods, specifically so that the moments of crisis do not require building them from scratch. The season has not been decided by what happened this week. It has been shaped by it. And how the Dodgers respond, how the new pitcher integrates, how the adjusted rotation performs, how the players already in place respond to the disruption around them, will tell us whether this night was a turning point or simply a moment of turbulence that the organization moved through without losing altitude. There is a version of this story that focuses on the bad news. 2 hospitalized pitchers. A rotation in emergency mode. A manager making announcements at hours that signal something has gone wrong. That version is true. But it is incomplete. The complete version includes everything that happened in the hours after the bad news arrived. The clarity of Robert's announcement. The scale of the contract, 6 years, on par with one of the largest pitching deals in baseball history, signed not in a moment of calm deliberation but in the immediate aftermath of a crisis, with full knowledge of what the crisis required. The GM, 1 hour after the meeting ended, already rewrote the rotation. The Dodgers did not absorb the shock of 2 hospitalizations and waited to see what happened next. They absorbed the shock and immediately began building the answer. That is not something every organization can do. It requires infrastructure. The trust between the manager, the GM, and the ownership group that allows decisions of this magnitude to be made at midnight without weeks of deliberation. The pre-existing relationships with player representatives that allow a 6-year contract to be finalized when the normal business hours are long past. The night tested everything the Dodgers had built. Everything held. The rotation has been rewritten. The signing has been made. The announcement is in the record books. And in a clubhouse that was processing the weight of 2 hospitalizations just hours ago, there is now something else alongside the concern. There is a plan. And in baseball, as in most things, having a plan, executed with conviction, in the middle of the night, when everything is uncertain and nothing is comfortable, is the difference between a crisis that defines you and a crisis that you move through. The Dodgers moved through it. Now comes everything after.